By the time Ethan Vale realized the storm had changed direction, the mountain had already erased the trail behind him. Snow drove across the ridge in white sheets, swallowing the black rocks, the bent pines, and even the weak beam of his helmet lamp. He had spent 23 years climbing places sensible people avoided, which meant he had developed a professional respect for bad weather and a deeply personal dislike of dying in it. "Excellent," he muttered, as the wind nearly tore the words from his mouth. A peaceful afternoon hike. Very relaxing. His cabin lay less than 3 kilometers downslope, but in the storm it might as well have been on Mars. He lowered his head, planted his ice axe, and moved one careful step at a time until a flash of pale blue light flickered beneath the snow to his left. At first, he assumed it was lightning reflecting from the ice. Then the light pulsed again, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat trapped beneath the mountain. Ethan stopped. Everything in him said to keep moving. Warm shelter was close. Curiosity was how people ended up frozen in rescue reports beneath sentences beginning with the words, "for reasons still unclear." The light pulsed a third time. Ethan sighed. "Fine, but if you're an ancient alien weapon, I'm going to be very disappointed." He crossed the slope, following the glow to a shallow crater hidden under wind-blown snow. A curved surface of dark metal protruded from the ice, smooth as glass and untouched by frost. It was too small to be an aircraft and too perfectly shaped to be debris. Thin silver symbols crawled across its surface, rearranging themselves whenever he looked directly at them. Ethan brushed away the snow with one gloved hand. The metal responded to his touch with a deep vibration that traveled through his arm and into his chest. A seam appeared. With a soft hiss, the object opened. Cold vapor spilled around his boots. Inside lay a woman. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared. She looked human at first, young, perhaps 20, with fair skin and long blonde hair floating around her face in frozen strands, but her ears were long and elegantly pointed, extending through openings in a shattered silver headpiece. She wore a fitted suit of white armor, woven from layers so fine they resembled fabric, though tiny lights still moved beneath its surface. Frost covered her eyelashes. A faint blue glow pulsed beneath the skin at her throat. Above her body, a transparent display flickered with symbols Ethan could not read, then abruptly changed into broken English. Life support, failure. Core temperature, critical. Signal active. "Of course," Ethan whispered, because finding an unconscious elf in a spaceship during a blizzard was exactly what today needed. He leaned into the capsule. Her skin was colder than the surrounding air, yet when he pressed 2 fingers beneath her jaw, he felt a weak pulse, slow, distant, but real. The display flashed again. Biological stasis. Collapse. 11 minutes. Ethan looked toward the invisible direction of his cabin. Carrying her would be dangerous. Leaving her would be murder. He pulled an emergency thermal blanket from his pack, wrapped it around her, and carefully lifted her from the pod. She was lighter than he expected, though the armor tightened around her body as if reacting protectively to his touch. A soft mechanical voice emerged from somewhere near her collar. "Unauthorized contact." Ethan adjusted her weight across his shoulders. "You're welcome. Threat assessment incomplete." "That makes 2 of us." The return journey became a battle measured in meters. Wind hammered his back, snow filled his goggles, and twice he nearly lost his footing. The woman remained unconscious, but strange images flashed above the device on her wrist. A ringed planet, a golden palace beneath violet stars, and enormous warships moving through space. Once, her fingers closed weakly around his coat. She spoke a single word in a language that sounded like glass bells. Ethan did not understand it, but the fear in her voice needed no translation. "Easy," he said, though he was not sure whether he meant her or himself. "We're almost there, assuming the cabin hasn't developed engines and left." At last, a dark shape emerged through the storm. Ethan forced open the door, carried her inside, and kicked it shut behind them. The cabin was small, crowded with climbing equipment, books, and one ancient heater that considered warmth an optional service. He laid the stranger beside the fireplace, fed wood into the flames, and began removing the frozen outer pieces of her armor. The material unfolded by itself, exposing a silver suit beneath. Her wrist device activated again. A thin beam of light scanned the room, passed over Ethan's face, and projected a column of unknown coordinates toward the ceiling. Far above the mountain, beyond the clouds and atmosphere, an invisible signal leapt into space. Ethan did not see it. He was too busy warming blankets, boiling water, and wondering how to explain to anyone that he had brought home a frozen alien woman. Outside, the storm screamed against the walls. Inside, the stranger's blue pulse grew slightly stronger. Then, somewhere beyond the solar system, something ancient received the signal and began to move. The stranger remained unconscious for nearly an hour, but the devices built into her silver suit refused to stay quiet. Tiny lines of blue light moved across the fabric as though searching for damage, pausing over her ribs, throat, and temples before rearranging into symbols Ethan could not understand. Every few minutes, the collar produced a soft tone, followed by a calm mechanical voice, announcing something in an alien language. Ethan decided it sounded far too polite for a machine that might be counting down to her death. He knelt beside the fireplace, rubbing warmth into her hands through the thermal blanket while the storm battered the cabin walls. "You know," he said, "most guests knock first. Some even bring food." Her fingers twitched. Ethan froze. The long, pointed ears hidden beneath her damp blonde hair shifted slightly, reacting to the sound of his voice. Then her eyes opened. They were pale gray, almost silver, and sharply focused despite the weakness in the rest of her body. For one brief second she stared at him in confusion. Then terror struck. She pulled away, struck the floor with one palm, and a burst of blue energy exploded from the bracelet around her wrist. Ethan threw himself sideways as the beam sliced through a wooden chair and buried itself in the wall with a smell like burned metal. "Good morning," he said from behind the table. "I see you found the hospitality settings." The woman raised her arm again, but her strength failed. The bracelet flickered and died. She tried to stand, stumbled, and caught herself against the fireplace stones. Her gaze moved rapidly around the room, taking in the climbing tools, the radio, the weather monitor, and the old hunting rifle hanging above the door. She spoke in a quick, musical language, each word edged with fear. Ethan slowly raised both hands. "I don't understand you," she repeated herself more sharply. "Still nothing. Louder doesn't make alien languages easier." Her collar glowed. A stream of broken sound emerged. "Identify, military, faction. Ethan, faction. Tired mountaineer." The device clicked, processed, and answered in her own language. Her expression changed, though not into trust. "Human," the translator said. "Last time I checked." She stared at him as if humans were either mythical creatures or especially disappointing animals. Then she touched the side of her neck and winced. "Where is transport?" "Buried in the snow. I brought you here before you became a decorative ice sculpture." The translator produced several harsh syllables. Her eyes widened. She moved toward the window, but Ethan stepped between her and the freezing glass. "You're not going outside." She lifted her chin. "You cannot command me." "Correct. The storm can." As if insulted by being mentioned, the wind slammed into the cabin hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. The woman looked toward the ceiling. Ethan nodded. "Very persuasive, isn't it?" Her suspicion weakened just enough for exhaustion to take over. She sank onto the bench near the fire. Ethan handed her a metal cup filled with warm water. She inspected it, then scanned it with her bracelet before drinking. "You scanned water?" he asked. "This world may contain toxins." "It does, mostly in politics and cheap coffee." The translator struggled with the sentence, causing her to frown. Ethan opened a packet of soup and placed it near the fire. She watched every movement. Slowly she touched the collar again. "Name?" "Ethan Vale." "I am—" She stopped. Fear returned, colder than before. "Lyra." He noticed the hesitation, but did not challenge it. "All right, Lyra. Are people looking for you?" Her gaze fell to the floor. "Many. Friends. Some believe they are." The answer was unsettling, but before Ethan could ask more, her wrist device projected a trembling hologram above the table. A star map appeared, vast and crowded with glowing systems. Several regions pulsed red. At the center floated an image of Lyra's face, surrounded by unfamiliar royal symbols. Then the projection vanished. "That looked official," Ethan said. Lyra gripped the edge of the blanket. "The signal must not have activated." Ethan remembered the beam that had risen toward the ceiling. "I'm guessing it activated." She closed her eyes. "Then they know." "Who?" The translator gave her answer in a whisper. "Everyone." Somewhere far above the storm, unseen by either of them, objects began entering the solar system without slowing. Hundreds of ships crossed the darkness in perfect formation, folding space around their hulls. In the cabin, Ethan stirred the soup and handed Lyra a spoon. "Whatever happens," he said, "you should eat first." She examined the spoon as though it were another weapon. "Primitive. That primitive object is currently defeating starvation." For the first time, a faint smile touched her face. It vanished quickly, but Ethan saw it. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Beyond the clouds, the stars were disappearing behind the shadows of approaching warships. Ethan woke before dawn because the cabin had become too quiet. The storm that had screamed against the walls all night was gone, leaving behind a silence so complete that he could hear the faint electric pulse of Lyra's wrist device from across the room. She was already awake, seated beside the dying fire with the blanket around her shoulders. Pale morning light touched her long ears, and the loose strands of blonde hair falling across her face. She looked less like a dying stranger now, and more like someone listening for an executioner outside the door. "You sleep badly," she said. The translator was working more smoothly, though her voice still carried a faint metallic echo. Ethan sat up on the narrow bench. "I sleep wonderfully. I just prefer doing it in 15-minute installments." Lyra did not smile. Her silver eyes remained fixed on the window. "Something is here." Ethan followed her gaze. No engines rumbled, no lights flashed across the ceiling. Yet the air inside the cabin felt strangely heavy, and the compass hanging beside the radio spun in slow circles. The old weather monitor displayed a row of meaningless symbols before shutting itself off. Ethan pulled on his boots and reached for his coat. "Stay here." "You cannot command me," Lyra replied automatically. "I know. We established that yesterday. Consider it a strongly worded suggestion." He opened the door. The mountain had vanished beneath a smooth white blanket, untouched except for the path leading from the cabin to the buried escape pod. Above it, the sky was filled with ships. They hovered in silence from one horizon to the other, enormous dark vessels shaped like silver spears, crescent moons, and angular fortresses. Some floated low enough to cast shadows across the snow. Others hung beyond the clouds, their outlines visible only when pale blue energy moved along their hulls. At the center of the formation waited a ship larger than the mountain itself, its golden surface reflecting the sunrise like a second dawn. Ethan stared for several seconds. Then he slowly lifted the metal cup still in his hand. "I should have made more coffee." Lyra stepped out behind him. The moment she appeared, every ship in the sky illuminated at once. Columns of white light descended across the valley. Armored figures emerged from them in perfect formations, hundreds of soldiers wearing mirrored helmets and carrying weapons that hummed with contained energy. Drones spread through the air like metallic birds. Ethan stood barefoot in one boot because he had forgotten to lace the other. "This is either a rescue," he murmured, "or the most dramatic complaint about my cooking in human history." Lyra's face had gone pale. "Do not move." "Interesting. You're allowed to command me?" "For the next 10 seconds, yes." A larger beam struck the snow 50 meters from the cabin. 3 figures appeared within it. The first 2 were tall guards in white armor. Between them stood a woman with long, pointed ears, dark ceremonial robes, and a crown made of shifting light. Behind her came an older man in black armor, his face rigid with shock. The soldiers spread outward, weapons lowered, but ready. Ethan glanced at Lyra. Her hands were trembling. "You know them." She did not answer. The crowned woman moved forward through the snow, slowly at first, then faster. Her royal composure broke completely. Lyra. The name came through dozens of external translators at once, echoing across the mountain. Lyra's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she seemed 20 years younger than her body, frightened and lost. Then she ran. The two women met halfway between the cabin and the landing beam. The crowned woman wrapped both arms around her, and the older man reached them seconds later, dropping to his knees in the snow as he touched Lyra's face, as if afraid she might disappear again. Around them, every soldier lowered a weapon and knelt. Ethan remained by the door, holding his cup, suddenly aware that he was witnessing something far larger than a rescue. A helmeted officer approached him and stopped at a respectful distance. "Human," the translator said. "Identify yourself." "Ethan Vale." The officer examined him from muddy boots to unshaven face. "You recovered, Her Highness?" Ethan looked past him toward Lyra. "I found her in the snow." The officer's posture changed instantly. He lowered his head. One by one, the nearest soldiers turned toward Ethan and knelt. Within seconds, the gesture spread across the valley. Hundreds of warriors bowed before the cabin while warships hovered overhead in absolute silence. Ethan looked down at his coffee. "This feels excessive." Lyra returned with the crowned woman and the older man beside her. Her eyes were wet, but there was strength in her voice now. "Ethan Vale, this is Queen Seraphine and King Kaler, my mother and father." Ethan gave them an awkward nod. "Welcome to Earth." Queen Seraphine studied him with an expression of gratitude and disbelief. "You saved the heir to the Aurelian throne." Ethan glanced at the broken chair visible through the cabin door. "She also shot my furniture." Lyra finally laughed, a clear sound that seemed to release something held inside her for 20 years. Several soldiers exchanged confused looks. The king did not laugh. He looked toward the buried escape pod, where royal technicians were already uncovering the shattered hull. "She disappeared 2 decades ago," he said. Ethan turned sharply. 2 decades? Lyra's smile faded. Above them, the golden flagship opened its vast hangar doors, and beyond the mountain, deep space scanners began detecting other fleets approaching from distant systems. Lyra had been found, but the galaxy had not yet decided whether her return would bring peace or war. The interior of the royal flagship was larger than Ethan's entire mountain valley. Its central hangar stretched into the distance beneath a ceiling of transparent crystal, through which Earth appeared as a blue curve wrapped in cloud. Sleek fighters rested on floating platforms. Mechanical servants moved silently between them, and rows of armored soldiers stood at attention as Lyra entered with her parents. Ethan followed several steps behind, still wearing his old climbing coat and carrying a backpack stained with snow, pine resin, and soup. Among the polished alien uniforms, he looked less like an honored guest and more like someone who had taken a wrong turn on the way to repair a furnace. Every soldier they passed bowed to Lyra. Then, after a brief hesitation, they bowed to Ethan as well. "This is becoming uncomfortable," he whispered. Lyra glanced back. "You rescued the missing heir to an interstellar dynasty. I also forgot to put on matching socks. History will try to overlook that." They entered a circular chamber where walls of liquid light displayed maps of hundreds of star systems. Red borders shifted across them like spreading wounds. At the center stood a transparent medical platform. Queen Seraphine guided Lyra onto it while a group of physicians activated rings of silver energy around her body. Holographic images of bones, organs, and unfamiliar glowing structures unfolded in the air. Ethan watched as one doctor's long ears stiffened in alarm. Her biological age is 21, the physician said, but the pod's temporal record confirms 19 years, 8 months, and 12 days in interrupted stasis. Lyra stared at the projection. I remember the explosion. Then the mountain. King Kalor's face tightened. For us, you were gone for 20 years. The words settled heavily over the chamber. Lyra looked toward her mother, who reached for her hand. Ethan turned away, giving them what privacy he could in a room occupied by 30 doctors, 12 guards, and a floating machine that seemed determined to scan everyone's emotional state. It drifted toward him and projected the words, elevated stress response. Thank you, Ethan told it. I had no idea. The device displayed possible sarcasm and retreated. A tall officer in black armor approached. His name, according to the translator, was Admiral Varese. His narrow face held none of the warmth Ethan had seen among Lyra's family. The human must be questioned, he said. Lyra stepped down from the medical platform. He has a name, and an unknown connection to your disappearance. Ethan raised an eyebrow. My connection was a shovel. Varese ignored him. With a gesture, he projected an image of the escape pod above the table. Its hull rotated slowly, revealing a dark fracture beneath the royal insignia. The guidance core was not damaged by impact. It was altered before launch. Someone programmed the pod to leave mapped space, disable its beacon, and maintain stasis until power exhaustion. King Kalor looked at the sabotage marks. An assassination, designed to leave no body. And no evidence, Seraphine said. Lyra's gaze hardened. Who had access? The Admiral hesitated. Members of the Royal Court, the Security Council, and the old diplomatic guard. Dozens of names appeared in the air. Some were crossed out as dead. Others now ruled planets, commanded fleets, or controlled trade routes that had grown powerful during Lyra's absence. Ethan studied the map while the aliens argued in low voices. One detail caught his eye. The escape pod's final path did not look random. It curved through a series of gravity wells before reaching Earth. That route, he said. Varese turned impatiently. What of it? It resembles a controlled descent. Whoever sabotaged the pod didn't simply send her into empty space. They aimed for a cold world with weak interstellar traffic. The chamber fell silent. A technician adjusted the display, then stared at the recalculated trajectory. He is correct. Earth was the intended destination. Ethan looked at Lyra. That feels less comforting than I hoped. Before anyone could respond, alarms rolled through the ship. The star maps vanished, replaced by images of several enormous fleets emerging beyond the moon. Their hulls carried the emblems of rival empires. Admiral Varese drew his weapon. They demand proof that the princess lives. Why? Ethan asked. King Kalor looked toward the approaching armadas. Because some built their power on her death. Others prepared for war over it. Lyra stepped beside Ethan, no longer appearing fragile or lost. Then they will see me. Seraphine shook her head. Not until we know who tried to kill you. Lyra's long ears angled back with quiet determination. If I remain hidden, they control the story again. Ethan sighed and tightened the straps of his backpack. I rescued you from one frozen box. I suppose keeping you out of another is part of the service. Lyra smiled faintly. Outside the transparent ceiling, warships gathered around Earth, and the peaceful blue planet disappeared beneath the shadows of a conflict that had waited 20 years for her return. The summit chamber occupied the highest point of the royal flagship, a vast circular hall surrounded by transparent walls that looked directly into space. Earth turned slowly below, blue and peaceful, while warships from 12 rival civilizations formed a glittering ring around the planet. Their weapons remained powered but inactive, which Admiral Varese described as a sign of diplomatic restraint. Ethan thought it looked more like 12 people pointing loaded rifles at one another while agreeing not to sneeze. Lyra stood beside the central platform in ceremonial armor provided by her mother. Silver plates curved over her shoulders and chest, threaded with faint golden light, and a narrow crown rested above her long, pointed ears. She appeared every inch the lost princess the galaxy remembered, though Ethan noticed her fingers tightening whenever another fleet transmitted a demand. "You can still wait," he said quietly. "Waiting is what they expect. People often expect me to make sensible choices too. They recover eventually." A small smile touched her lips, but it disappeared when the chamber lights dimmed. Holographic representatives appeared around them, military rulers, ambassadors, merchants, and royal envoys, each enlarged to imposing size. Several began speaking at once. Some demanded proof of Lyra's identity. Others accused the Aurelian throne of manufacturing her return to reclaim territories lost during her absence. One reptilian minister suggested Ethan had been hired to support an elaborate deception. Ethan leaned toward Varese. "Do I look expensive?" "You look unemployed," the admiral replied. "Good. We're beginning to understand each other." Queen Seraphine raised one hand and the voices fell silent. Medical records, genetic scans, and pod data appeared above the platform. The evidence was overwhelming, yet distrust remained visible across the holographic faces. Lyra stepped forward. "I am Lyra Calestis, daughter of Seraphine and Kaelor, heir to the Aurelian throne. 20 years ago, my evacuation pod was sabotaged. I survived only because a human found me beneath the ice." Every hologram turned toward Ethan. He lifted a hand in greeting. The soup also helped. Before the translators could decide whether that was relevant, the chamber doors exploded inward. A wave of distortion swept across the floor, bending light and sound. 3 guards collapsed without a wound. Varese shouted a warning as figures emerged from invisibility, their armor covered in shifting mirrors. One raised a weapon toward Lyra. Ethan saw the attacker before most of the soldiers did, not because he understood cloaking technology, but because the polished floor showed a faint trail of melting frost beneath invisible boots. He grabbed Lyra around the waist and pulled her down as a beam of black energy tore through the space where her head had been. The blast struck the transparent wall, spreading fractures of blue light across its surface. Royal guards opened fire. The chamber erupted into chaos as holographic diplomats vanished one after another. Ethan crawled behind the central platform with Lyra. "Does this happen at every family reunion?" "Only the formal ones." Another assassin appeared above them, using gravity boots to cling to the ceiling. Ethan yanked a climbing hook from his pack and threw it. The metal caught the attacker's ankle. He pulled with all his weight, sending the cloaked figure crashing onto the platform. Varese fired once, and the assassin's armor shut down in a shower of sparks. "Primitive," the admiral said, staring at the rope. "Effective," Ethan replied. The remaining attackers retreated through a maintenance corridor while drones sealed the chamber. Lyra rose, furious rather than frightened. One wounded assassin lay near the shattered doors, his helmet cracked. Varese tore it away and froze. The face beneath belonged to a member of the Aurelian diplomatic guard, a man whose name had appeared on the list of those with access to Lyra's pod. "Commander Theron," Queen Seraphine whispered. The assassin smiled weakly. The princess should have remained dead. Before he could say more, a small device beneath his armor began pulsing red. Ethan recognized the rhythm immediately. "That's not a medical light." Varese ripped the device free and hurled it into a containment field seconds before it detonated. The blast filled the chamber with white fire, trapped behind transparent energy. When the light faded, Theron was unconscious, but alive. King Kaelor looked toward the surrounding fleets, many of which had witnessed the attack through the summit transmission. "Now they have proof." "Proof of what?" Ethan asked. Lyra stared at the captured assassin. "That the conspiracy is still inside our empire." Outside, several rival fleets began moving closer, no longer certain whether they had come to witness a miracle or the opening battle of a new war. Commander Theron regained consciousness inside a transparent containment cell buried deep within the flagship, where gravity, temperature, and even sound could be controlled from outside. He sat against the curved wall with blood at the corner of his mouth, watching Lyra through a field of pale blue light. Ethan stood beside her, still carrying the climbing rope that had brought one assassin down from the ceiling. Admiral Varese had suggested replacing it with a military weapon. Ethan had declined on the grounds that the rope had already passed its first performance review. You served my family, Lyra said. You guarded me when I was a child. Theron's expression remained cold. I guarded an idea. Then your disappearance revealed how weak that idea was. He looked toward Ethan. 20 years of planning, and a mountain hermit ruins everything with a shovel. It was a very good shovel, Ethan replied. Varese activated a neural scanner above the cell. Rings of light passed through Theron's skull, projecting fragments of memory into the air. A dark council chamber, masked figures, fleets burning above distant planets, and Lyra's escape pod being reprogrammed beneath the palace. One image appeared repeatedly, a silver emblem shaped like a broken star. Queen Seraphine stiffened when she saw it. The Meridian Circle. King Kaler's face lost its color. The Meridian Circle had once been a secret alliance of nobles, generals, and trade ministers formed to protect the empire during times of crisis. After Lyra vanished, they had quietly taken control of border worlds, military supply routes, and diplomatic channels. In 20 years, they had transformed grief into power. Theron smiled as the scanner exposed him. You cannot arrest half the empire. No, Lyra said, but I can make the other half see them. The royal fleet redirected every communication array toward the neutral summit station orbiting beyond the moon. Representatives from dozens of civilizations gathered there, while rival armadas remained locked around Earth. Lyra would address them publicly, presenting the sabotage records and Theron's memories before the Meridian Circle could destroy the evidence. The journey to the station took less than a minute through a folded space corridor, yet Ethan spent most of it arguing with a ceremonial attendant who insisted his coat was unsuitable for galactic diplomacy. This coat survived 6 avalanches, Ethan said. Has your diplomacy survived 6 avalanches? The attendant looked horrified. Lyra, dressed in white royal armor, leaned close and whispered, Please keep it. They need the experience. The summit station resembled a crystal wheel suspended against the stars. Inside its central chamber, hundreds of delegates occupied floating platforms arranged around Lyra. Some were human-like, others insectoid, aquatic, or composed of energy contained within mechanical frames. As the evidence began to play above them, silence spread through the hall. Then Ethan noticed something strange. One delegate near the upper gallery had not moved since the transmission began. Everyone else reacted, leaning forward, speaking to aides, changing color, or adjusting translation devices. This figure remained perfectly still beneath a dark diplomatic robe. More importantly, frost was forming along the edge of its platform, despite the controlled temperature. Ethan remembered the assassin's cloaking armor melting snow on the summit floor. Varese, he murmured, your motionless friend is either very calm or very cold. The admiral followed his gaze. His eyes narrowed. The delegate moved suddenly, throwing off the robe as mirrored armor unfolded around him. Hidden weapons rose from 3 other platforms. The Meridian Circle had infiltrated the summit. Energy bolts crossed the chamber. Delegates scattered while security fields snapped into place. One assassin fired toward the evidence core suspended above Lyra. Ethan swung his rope around a support rail, launched himself across the gap, and struck the attacker with both boots. They crashed onto a lower platform as Varese and the royal guards opened fire. Lyra did not retreat. She seized the central broadcast controls and locked the transmission open across every fleet in the system. You tried to erase me once, she declared as battle raged around her. You will not erase the truth. Theron's memories flooded every screen. Names, payments, secret orders, and recordings of Meridian leaders discussing the wars they intended to provoke. One by one, enemy ships outside powered down their weapons as their crews saw who had manipulated them. The final assassin rushed Lyra with a blade of compressed light. Ethan stepped between them, caught the attacker's wrist with the loop of his rope, and twisted until the weapon fell. Lyra struck the assassin with the armored edge of her forearm, sending him unconscious across the floor. She looked at Ethan, breathing hard. You were supposed to remain behind security. I tried. Security kept exploding. Across the chamber, the silver broken star emblems vanished from military uniforms as officers renounced the Meridian Circle in real time. Queen Seraphine's voice came over the station speakers, announcing the arrests of council members throughout the empire. The conspiracy that had hidden for 20 years was collapsing in minutes. Yet beyond Earth, one enormous warship turned away from the Allied formation and began charging a planet-killing weapon. Varese looked toward the tactical display. Their leader is escaping. Lyra watched the weapon align with Earth. "No," she said quietly. "He's trying to bury the truth beneath an entire world." The Meridian warship hung beyond the summit station like a blade aimed at Earth. Rings of crimson energy rotated around its forward cannon, drawing power from the ship's engines until the stars behind it bent into thin arcs. Across the tactical display, the projected blast widened from a single point to a red circle large enough to swallow half a continent. Admiral Varese ordered every Allied vessel to fire, but the traitor ship surrounded itself with a distortion shield formed from folded space. Missiles vanished before reaching it. Energy beams curved harmlessly away. "Time to discharge," Lyra asked. 4 minutes, Varese replied. Ethan stared at the rotating weapon and felt the same cold certainty he had known on collapsing ice fields. Panic wasted strength, and mountains did not care how important you believed yourself to be. "Can we get aboard?" "Not through that shield. Everything has an entrance." Varese pointed to a maintenance schematic. A thermal exhaust channel opens for 3 seconds during each charging cycle. It is barely wide enough for a service drone. Ethan tightened the old climbing rope around his waist. "Then it is fortunate I skipped breakfast." Lyra caught his arm. "You are not going alone." Minutes later, a Royal Interceptor plunged toward the enemy vessel with Lyra, Ethan, and Varese strapped inside. The pilot matched the cannon's energy pulse, diving between waves of warped gravity. When the exhaust channel opened, the interceptor released them in armored descent shells, no larger than coffins. Ethan considered making a joke about the shape, then decided the universe had already demonstrated an unhealthy interest in freezing people inside boxes. Their shells struck the interior conduit and burst open amid steam and blue sparks. They entered a ship already tearing itself apart. Loyal crew members fought Meridian soldiers in the corridors while artificial gravity shifted unpredictably. Theron's broadcast had exposed the conspiracy even here. Some officers had turned against their commander. Others continued obeying out of fear. At the command deck, the leader of the Meridian Circle waited beneath the broken star emblem. Chancellor Orden was an elderly nobleman with silver hair, long ears, and ceremonial armor blackened by 20 years of secret war. "You should have died in the pod," he told Lyra. "Your absence created order." "It created your throne," she replied. Orden activated the cannon remotely. "History remembers survivors, not innocents." Ethan glanced at the countdown above the main console. "History also remembers people who build planet-destroying weapons, usually under the category of bad decisions." Orden fired a pulse blade and the chamber erupted. Varese engaged the Chancellor's guards while Lyra crossed blades with Orden. Ethan moved toward the weapon controls, only to find them sealed behind a genetic lock. The system rejected him with a polite tone. "That machine has better manners than most diplomats," he muttered. Lyra heard him and understood. Breaking away from Orden, she pressed her hand to the console. The system recognized the royal bloodline, but Orden had rewritten the command hierarchy during her absence. Access denied. Legal heir status. Deceased. For one stunned second, Lyra stared at the words that had defined her for 20 years. Then Ethan placed his hand over hers. "You are standing here." Her expression changed. Fear, grief, and anger settled into something stronger. "Then the system will learn." She drew power from the living circuitry in her armor and forced her biological signature directly into the ship's core. Golden light spread through the controls. The computer hesitated, recalculated, and spoke across every deck. Air status corrected. Princess Lyra Kalestis. Living. Command authority restored. The cannon shut down with 2 seconds remaining. Its stored energy reversed through the ship, disabling every Meridian weapon at once. Orden lunged toward Lyra in desperation, but Ethan looped the climbing rope around his ankle. The Chancellor struck the floor with considerably less dignity than his speeches had promised. Varese placed him under arrest. Primitive, the Admiral said, looking at the rope. Effective, Ethan answered. Weeks later, the fleets departed Earth in peace. The Meridian Circle's leaders were tried before a united galactic council, and the worlds they had manipulated began rebuilding their alliances. Lyra was formally restored as heir, not as the frightened young woman who had vanished, but as a leader who had returned from death and refused to let others define her future. Ethan attended the ceremony wearing his mountain coat over formal alien clothing, a compromise that offended 3 royal tailors and delighted Lyra. The Aurelian family offered him land, wealth, and a permanent place at court. He accepted only repairs for his cabin, a new chair to replace the one Lyra had destroyed, and access to the stars whenever he wished. Months later, he stood outside that same cabin beneath a clear night sky. The roof no longer leaked, the heater finally worked, and a small royal shuttle rested absurdly between the pine trees. Lyra stepped beside him, her long blonde hair moving in the cold wind. "Do you regret finding me?" she asked. Ethan looked toward the stars, no longer seeing them as distant lights, but as roads waiting to be traveled. "I regret the chair." She laughed, and the sound carried across the snow. When the shuttle lifted, Ethan left the mountain willingly. He had begun the journey as a man content to survive alone. He ended it understanding that saving one stranger had given him something survival never could, a place in a larger world and people worth returning to.